All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. We're going to explore something pretty fundamental to the human condition, why we suffer, and way more importantly, how we can actively create a real state of flow and genuine fulfillment. I mean, we spend so much time chasing this incredibly abstract concept of happiness, right? And yet, we usually just end up feeling more stressed out and disconnected than ever. So, today we're unpacking the actual mechanics of our minds. We're going to use some incredibly insightful concepts to show you exactly how to bypass the traps we constantly set for ourselves.
To really understand our daily struggles, we've got to confront the two massive emotional roadblocks that our own minds literally generate. Seriously, if you asked 100 people what feelings freeze them in their tracks the most, you're going to hear the same two answers over and over again. And the craziest part? Both of these emotions are completely based on a distortion of time.
Those two emotions are regret and anxiety. Most of us are totally trapped, basically ping-ponging back and forth between regretting things we can't change, dwelling on the past, and stressing out over a future that hasn't even happened yet. Just think about a normal morning. You oversleep, you instantly regret hitting snooze, and then boom, you pivot straight to massive anxiety about being late for work. While you're in that mental tug-of-war, you're entirely missing the present moment, which, ironically, is the literal only moment where you can actually take action.
This brilliantly illustrates our next core concept, captured so perfectly by author Eckhart Tolle. He reminds us that the past is really just a collection of past-present moments, and the future, well, that's just a bunch of present moments that haven't happened yet. Like, if you have a huge paper due in 2 weeks, all the time you spend regretting your procrastination or agonizing over the workload, it does absolutely nothing to actually write the paper. Focusing intensely on the present is the absolute first step to solving the problem that's staring you right in the face.
All right, that brings us to Section 1, pain versus optional suffering.
Now, obviously, staying present is incredibly tough when painful things are actively happening in the real world, and this introduces us to a super powerful concept for processing negative experiences, which is often called the theory of the two darts. Here's how it works. The first dart is just the inevitable pain of life. It's that sudden shock when you stub your toe, touch a hot stove, or maybe experience a really painful rejection. You can't avoid it. But the second dart? That is completely optional suffering. That's the stuff we inflict on ourselves. It's our psychological reaction to the first dart. It's obsessing for months over a bad breakup, or lying awake agonizing over test results weeks after the test is done. Every time we do that, we are literally throwing a second dart at ourselves.
This quote by Rick Hanson really hits the nail on the head here regarding how absurd that second dart is, and it heavily echoes ancient Stoicism too. Stoicism basically argues that the agonizing pain you feel is actually just your own mental resistance to things you have absolutely no power to change. Pain is just the result of resisting the uncontrollable. Negative events are going to happen. That's the first dart. But our irrational reactions, our desperate need to change what's already happened, that is the self-created suffering of the second dart.
So, how do we actually stop doing this? Let's move to Section 2, letting go of illusions.
The absolutely crucial point here is that to stop throwing that second dart, we've got to learn to observe our own minds and just let go of our false attachments. We need a way to step outside of our own swirling thoughts, to hit the brakes on our mental autopilot before we crash into a wall of anxiety.
Well, here's a totally fascinating mental hack inspired by physics, specifically the quantum Zeno effect. In physics, if you constantly observe a system, you can actually freeze it in its current state. You can totally apply this to your brain. If you feel yourself spiraling, just ask yourself, okay, what is my next thought going to be? Just waiting for it completely interrupts your autopilot. By actively observing your thought process, you separate your real identity from those nagging negative thoughts. You become the silent watcher, not the victim.
Let's look at how this builds into real composure. When people say, hey, keep your composure, they usually kind of mean hide your emotions. But true composure isn't about being a robot. If you get an email saying you got into your dream school, go ahead and celebrate. Composure is really about acting as a reset button. It means feeling the win or the loss, letting it really sink in, but not developing this permanent hijacked reaction to it. You experience the joy without immediately demanding even more success, and you experience the sadness without deciding your entire life is completely ruined.
We can also drastically cut down our suffering by just decluttering our egos. I like to think of this as the Google Maps zoom out. Imagine looking at yourself from the top of a skyscraper. Then zoom out to your city, then your continent, and then the whole globe. You're a tiny part of a massive universe. So why do we attach our deep, permanent identities to stuff? Every time we say, my car or my phone, we're handing those objects power over us. When they inevitably break or get lost, we feel real, genuine grief. Letting go of our attachment to material things completely regulates our sense of self and it protects our peace.
And you know, protecting that peace means embracing reality exactly as it is. The Dalai Lama and tons of other philosophical traditions always remind us that change is basically life's only constant. Fighting change is a massive source of suffering. Also, instead of buying into that toxic modern advice to just fake it till you make it, we should honestly accept our limitations. Just openly admitting when you don't know something, that invites people to actually help you, which builds real confidence and community. Strip away the labels, drop the fake facade, and just focus on simple, compassionate actions.
All right, moving right along to Section 3, pleasure versus true enjoyment. So, once we've cleared away those illusions, we run straight into a huge misunderstanding in modern society about how we actually build a good life. We fundamentally confuse two completely different concepts, and honestly, it's making us miserable. There's a massive difference between pleasure and enjoyment. We spend so much time chasing passive, fleeting pleasures like binge-watching shows, doom scrolling, or mindless online shopping. Those are sensory experiences that just happen to us. But true, lasting happiness, that only comes from active, conscious enjoyment. Enjoyment takes focus, it takes real engagement and effort. Pleasure steals your attention, but enjoyment actually forces you to harness it.
Psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl pointed this out so profoundly. He noted that pleasure is really often just a distraction from a lack of meaning. Think about it. Relying on pleasure means you're just surrendering your control to whatever external stimuli is right in front of you. But choosing enjoyment, that means you're actively engaging with life. You're working toward meaningful goals. You are totally in the driver's seat.
Which brings us to the ultimate transformation in today's explainer. Section 4, finding your flow state.
If passive pleasure doesn't work, and if just dodging that second dart only keeps us at neutral, how on earth do we actively create true, lasting happiness? Well, the secret is mastering your focus. The psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi calls this optimal experience flow. Flow is that amazing, magical zone where you're so deeply focused on an activity that time just literally disappears. Your worries completely vanish. You are entirely immersed in the present moment, which, like we talked about earlier, is exactly where we need to be. But flow isn't an accident. It happens when the challenge right in front of you perfectly matches your current skill level.
So how do we get there naturally? Well, first off, you don't chase money or status. You pick an activity you do purely for the love of it. Coding, cooking, playing guitar, writing, whatever it is. Second, you have to constantly balance the challenge. Say you're learning chess. You start on the easiest level so you don't get frustrated. But as you get better, you actively bump up the difficulty so you don't get bored. Flow is found balancing right on that exact edge.
But here's the catch. Balancing on that edge takes real effort. As author Mark Manson puts it, you have to be willing to struggle a little bit. The absolute best moments in our lives aren't the passive, lazy Sundays on the couch. No, the best moments happen when your mind or your body is voluntarily stretched to its absolute limits because you're trying to accomplish something genuinely difficult and worthwhile.
So the grand takeaway of this whole explainer is that the modern myth of finding happiness is honestly a trap. Happiness isn't some math equation you solve. It's not a destination you magically arrive at once you get the fancy car or the perfect job. Happiness is actually a human construct that only shows up as a byproduct of actively solving meaningful problems in the present moment. It's basically the exhaust fumes of a life engaged in purposeful, challenging action.
So instead of freaking out about a future you literally can't control, or throwing second darts at yourself over past regrets, or just numbing your brain with empty pleasures, I want to leave you with a question. What specific, immediate, small problem are you going to tackle today? Are you going to finally fix that old bike? Are you going to call that relative you've been avoiding? Pick a meaningful struggle right now, step in your flow, and discover the real enjoyment that's just waiting for you on the other side.